back to another RfRx video. My name is Amaya Perez. I'm the online programming director of RfR, and I'm here with Madeline, who is usually a social hangout co-host, and she has recently joined me as an actual co-host of the RfRx session. So welcome everyone. If you have been here before, welcome back. And if you're new here, thank you so much for joining us this time. Obviously, Madeline, thank you so much for joining me today. And could you mind pulling up the first poll, please, to get the audience engaged?
Not at all. So we have the first poll up on the screen now. I will go ahead and read the questions, and they're rated 1 through 5. There's 4 questions total. So the first one, if you are ever unsure about the meaning of a word, do you just ignore it and move on? That's option 1, or A. B is correct them as soon as you notice. Next, ask for their definition, or do you end the talk and grab a dictionary? The second question is, when assessing a person's level of confidence, do you A, insist on their participation, B, link to the truth of the claim, C, avoid revealing your position, or D, assume that they are lying? The next question was question 3. If the word faith comes up, do you immediately A, offer definitions to consider, B, check to see if faith is pretending to know something, C, use the outsider test with them, or D, ask if they have a definition of that word? And lastly, the chat is, you know that the chat is over when the timer beeps at the agreed upon time, either party says so, you see a dip in their level of confidence, or it starts to become noisy. So these are your options that'll be up on the screen. I'll keep them here. While you guys answer, I want to just give a quick shout out to the ACD, the Atheist Community of Discord, for streaming this and all of our videos on their channel.
Cool, thank you, Madeline. So I'm just going to start doing the introduction by just explaining a little bit what we do in RfRx. So for those of you who are new here, RfRx is a series of online weekly shows where we bring in people to talk about different topics that are relevant to anyone who is either living religion or has already left religion. This is a good way of providing good advice and coping skills to anyone who needs them right now. And if you want to watch any of our previous RfRx sessions, we have a YouTube channel where you can find all of our previous sessions. And if you want to send us any sort of feedback, any suggestions for any speakers or any topics, anything at all, we have an email that you can write us to, and I'm sure that Todd will link everything in the chat. So thank you so much for that, Todd. And then obviously RfRx is part of Recovering from Religion as a charity in general. So just to explain a little bit what we do in Recovering from Religion. So RfR basically has a mission statement. And that mission statement is that we offer hope, healing, and support to those who are struggling with issues of religion and non-belief. So first of all, the way we offer hope is by sharing and listening to personal stories. So it's this idea that if I can go through something, you can also go through that thing. And we can help each other in the process of overcoming any struggles that we may have. And in order to provide this hope aspect, we have a blog and also a podcast. Again, all the links will be in the chat. And if you're watching this on YouTube, all the links we mentioned will be in the description box down below. So that is how we offer hope. And then we also offer healing. And the way we offer healing is via our helpline. You can access our helpline either via online chat or telephone call. And this is a place where our trained agents will listen to you with an empathetic ear and no judgment or criticism to any issue that you may have, again, related to religion. This is a completely safe and confidential support, and it's also available 24/7. So if you feel like you could use just someone that listens to you, please do contact our helpline agents because they are amazingly trained and they will definitely help you. And another part of healing is our resource page. So we have a very, very large number of resource page. We have all sorts of articles, podcasts, books, videos, just anything you can imagine. We have divided the resources in different topics. So let's say you're, excuse me, you are a Muslim that is looking for resources specific to your religion, you will find them there. If you're struggling with the fear of hell, you will find a resource for you. It's such a massive library that we have collected. So if you feel like maybe reading something or watching a video about a specific topic could help you, go to our resource page. And now, Madeline, I'm gonna ask you to explain support, please.
Yes, happily. So we offer support in two ways, via the peer support groups in the Secular Therapist Project, or Therapy Project, I should say. The peer support groups are face-to-face in-person meetings that are currently virtual, and we're always looking to form more. And with them being virtual now, you're able to join anywhere. So these have continued to grow. There's over 50 now around the world. You can find the nearest one on the Meetup website under Recovering from Religion. That should be in the chat for you. And then about the Secular Therapy Project, it's to help you connect with a licensed secular mental health care provider. These providers are carefully screened for the criteria of appropriate licensing in their state or country, maintaining a secular practice so they won't proselytize to you, and exclusive use of evidence-based treatments. And they can be found at seculartherapy.org.
Fantastic. Thank you, Madeline. And then the last two things I want to mention before getting into the actual session is, first of all, the online community, because we do offer a service where we have an online platform. And in this online platform, you can contact people that share similar backgrounds, similar stories as you, so you share the same background. And we have all sorts of different groups. We have people that are only like part of the women's group. We have LGBTQ groups. We have groups for specific religions. We have groups for Australians, for families, for all sorts of different groups. So if you feel like what you need is just to meet people that know what you're going through because they have also gone through the same thing, I highly encourage you to join one of our online communities. The way to join one of these communities is just contact one of our helpline agents that I mentioned before. Again, you can either call us or send us a text, and we will be able to get you in contact with, one of these online groups, whichever you prefer, really. And apart from the chat platform, they also hold either weekly or bi-weekly Zoom meetings. So it's also a great way of meeting people in a bit more personal way. And the last thing I wanted to mention was volunteering, because Recovering from Religion is a charity. It is exclusively run by volunteers. And I just wanted to share a bit of my experience in volunteering, because it has been such an amazing journey for myself, and I know for so many others too. I highly encourage you that if you do believe in our mission, you join us as a volunteer. We have all sorts of different roles for you. You could be a helpline agent, you could be a support group leader, you could be a co-host here in RfRx. You never know where you're going to end. So if you do believe in our mission, please do consider contacting us. And all you have to do is go to our volunteering page, which I'm sure Todd will have linked down below. Thank you, Todd. Amazing, also it's useful. And now, Madeline, do you want to explain the structure of today's session, just to give a bit of a guideline, and then we will introduce our amazing guest of today.
Yes, so really quick, the discussion will last roughly an hour with our guest. We do ask that you type your questions in the chat. There'll be a question and answer session for 20 to 30 minutes after the interview with our guest. And after that, we'll have our hangout session where the camera goes off, the recording does, and everyone can get off mute and interact a little bit more.
Fantastic, thank you. So it's myself who introduces the guest, but Anthony happens to be a long-term volunteer in RfR. So he's good friends with our director, our RfR director. So I'm just going to let Dr. Ray introduce him, because I'm sure he will do a fantastic job. So Dr. Ray, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Amaya. I am delighted to say my good friend Anthony is our speaker today. He and I have known each other for 7 or 8 years. I lost count. It's probably could be longer than that even. I don't know. But the cool thing about Anthony is you may not know this, but Anthony has been a volunteer for Recovering from Religion for about 6 years. He and I were comparing notes, and we think it's right about 6 years. He's probably one, if not the longest serving volunteer for Recovering from Religion. And he does a whole lot of other things other things too. So I'm thrilled to have Anthony here tonight. Anthony has been a pioneer, and I've watched him every step of the way. He and I've compared notes. I've learned from Anthony. I mean, I'm a trained psychologist, and I've been doing street epistemology kinds of questioning my whole career for 30, 40 years. And I still learn from Anthony how to ask good questions. So you're in for a treat here tonight, as far as I'm concerned. I think Anthony is one of the most skilled listeners I've ever encountered outside of a few psychologists that with PhDs. And oh, by the way, Anthony beats a lot of psychologists, I think, in his listening skills. So and I'm sincere about that, Anthony. I'm not laughing it off, because you really are a very, very good listener. And I think Anthony is among the best teachers. And I think a good teacher is somebody that can model the behavior he's trying to teach. And nobody models the behavior or takes the risks in modeling the behavior more than Anthony. Going out in the middle of some park or some university and putting a camera up and exposing himself to who knows what, but he is so damn skilled about it. I just really, really appreciate it. He also, has it been 2 years, Anthony, since you guys founded SE International?
I think we founded it in 2019, so it'll be 2 years this year.
About 2 years. He founded Street Epistemology International and has been growing that organization. He's the executive director and has a very good functional board that is worldwide, and they're teaching people all over the world how to do this. And oh, by the way, a lot of our volunteers have benefited from his teaching, from his model, from his organization. We get volunteers from SE all the time, and we send volunteers to SE all the time because we're just very tight. There's only a couple organizations on this planet that's Recover from Religion goes out of its way to try and support, and Street Epistemology is one of those two. The other one is Black Non-Believers with Mandisa Thomas, who's been a speaker here as well. So that's how important we think Street Epistemology is, and how important we think Anthony is to the effort that we're trying to do here. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, Anthony, for coming here tonight, and I really appreciate all that you've done for us, and appreciate what you're doing tonight as well. Thanks, Amaya.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. So yeah, I'm just gonna echo what Dr. Ray has said. Thank you so much, Anthony, for being here today. And I'm really looking forward to see how you blow our minds with your presentation today.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, we set the bar really high right out of the gate. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for the wonderful introductions. I love Recovering from Religion. I view you as family, essentially, in this activism that we're doing and the different ways that we're going about it. So thank you so much for the kind introduction and for all the work that you put into this behind the scenes, Amaya. I greatly appreciate it, as well as Madeline. Thank you. I also want to say thank you, Dr. Ray, for that kind introduction. And I see Gayle Jordan is here as well. So Gayle, thank you for all that you do for Recovering from Religion. Skilled listener, boy. I don't know if my kids or my wife would agree with that, but maybe. I do try to be a good listener. I think that's really key when you do street epistemology. Yeah, I guess I'm a pretty good listener. I try to. You have to sort of listen to what you're being told when you want to explore somebody's belief. So it is important that you do that. Dr. Ray had mentioned that I've been a volunteer for Recovering from Religion for a while. It's about 6 years. And I started off being a helpline agent. I did that for about 2 years. And then lately I've been interviewing people, I've been applying my listening skills to people who are interested in volunteering for this organization. In fact, I did 2 this morning. And in fact, if you are an RfR volunteer, there's a good chance that I probably interviewed you if you came along, in the last 4, 5, 6 years or so. Gosh, it's been a long time. Yeah, I absolutely love talking to people and engaging with them, and then being able to help RfR in that regard is really good. So if you're not aware of if you're not aware of Recovering from Religion, this is your first exposure to this group, I definitely like you to pay attention, Look into their website and the resources that they offer. They provide a tremendous service for people who are struggling with doubt, with questions, the very thing that is on the flip end of what can result from a conversation where we're doing SE. So this combination, this gathering of sorts is, we're kind of two peas in a pod, I think. We complement each other very well. Very quickly, though, I wanted to do a fast survey of people. So if you look at the Zoom chat, Todd's going to copy and paste 5 options. Let me explain them first, Todd, and then if you haven't pasted them, just hold off. But I want to see like where you are coming from. If you're more affiliated with the street epistemology side or the recovering from religion side, or perhaps you're familiar with both groups. But if you're a little bit more heavily weighted in the RfR one, if you can put I'm with RfR/SE, that would be great. If you're more affiliated with the SE side of it, you can go ahead and paste that now, Todd. If you don't know what SE or RfR is and you're still here, I'm glad that you're here. You can go ahead and just drop in the word other. Just a very quick survey. I thought it might be nice to see where you folks are coming from. All right, I want to go over the objectives also for tonight. Todd, if you want to go ahead and paste that in there. I'm going to, I covered my introduction, and also we have about an hour of this. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, 20 to 30 minutes for a Q&A. And like they were saying, we're going to probably have, we're going to get together and do an informal hangout afterwards. And I'm not going to probably be there for 3 or 4 hours or 5 hours like somebody said that this goes, but I'll be there for a little bit. But I do want to cover some of the basics. I'll spend about 7 minutes on what the basics of street epistemology are for people who have no idea what that is. I want to go over some common misunderstandings of the approach. Then I want to cover when you should probably not use this method. And then I want to talk about some of the barriers to effective engagement, things that can get in the way when you're using this approach, things that could prevent you from being successful at the approach. Everyone asked me this one too. How do you stay calm when you're having these talks? So we're going to give you some tips on that. And then we're going to wrap up with some questions and answers. Somebody was asking me right before I did this, well, what makes this talk intermediate? Why isn't it just a basic course on street epistemology? And I thought that was a really good question. I wasn't planning to mention it, but most people who are familiar with SE kind of get the basics, and I'm going to cover what street epistemology is in a second, but the intermediate aspect of it, I think, is sharing my experience where I've encountered roadblocks in the hundreds of conversations I've had with people where I was using street epistemology, and giving you some tips, giving you some ideas on how to work around some of those roadblocks that you're going to probably encounter. Things that will give you, I suppose, a leg up when you're trying to implement this approach. Whether you are more on the SE side of things, where you're naturally waiting for people to surface a claim, or you're not instigating. Instigating is such a wrong word, but you're initiating talks with people. But also, if you're on the RfR side of it, I think these tips will be useful regardless of where you are and which entity you might be using the approach with. So if I notice things that might be useful for an RfR person, I'll try to highlight that. And same thing with somebody who's just interested in SE proper. All right, let's go to the basics of street epistemology. I've got about 7 minutes for this. Gosh, I'm trying to get through this really quick. And then save your questions for the end. There may be people who are watching your questions and maybe summarizing them and asking them later, I'm not sure. Or maybe you'll have an opportunity to ask them yourselves. But street epistemology originated, well, if you want to really think about it, it's an offshoot of the Socratic method. So if you've ever taken a philosophy course, or you've studied that, or you've read some of the dialogues of Plato, you might notice that there's some similarities. We tend to ask a lot of questions in street epistemology, and a philosophy professor who is also an atheist realized we can use this approach when we engage with theists about the claims that they make. Well, when you start going out and doing street epistemology, not everyone you run into is making a claim about a theist. They may make a claim about mask usage lately, or they think that maybe they're more related to or interested in what we might call conspiracies or QAnon. There's no end to the application of the approach. One thing that it's really important though is when we're using street epistemology, and epistemology is essentially the study of knowledge. And with street epistemology, we're interested in how you think you know something to be true. And street is a little bit of a misleading name. I think it could give people the impression that we're initiating talks on the street, and that's the only place that you can do this. It's absolutely not the case. And I know from observing some of the folks at RfR, this approach will often be used to help the person that you're speaking with or chatting with on the helpline, what solutions they think they need the most. How do they think that they can resolve the issues that are facing them? So this application of the Socratic method by asking questions is extremely valuable in not only exploring belief claims, but helping people reveal the solutions that they think that might be able to help them. It's really important though that you try to make your conversation partner the focus. That's really what we try to do in street epistemology. Also, I think it's important when we're using this approach, it's identifying what's really propping this up. You have this belief or this claim that you're making. I really want to understand your reasons and your methods, and I want to bring clarity to your view to myself, but also to you, because not many times do people explore why they actually think something to be the case. We're usually forming beliefs, and it's not very often that we have to explain how we justified them to our own satisfaction. And that's largely what we do in street epistemology. We also don't try to eat the whole sandwich, basically. We might just take a little bit of a nibble. Let's just place a little bit of a pebble in your shoe to give you something to think about so that you can walk away and decide whether or not you want to address the pebble that's in your shoe or not. Another thing that we try to do in sort of the basics of street epistemology is resist telling people what they should think. Ideally, the conversation is about them and their views and their meanings of words, so we can explore how they concluded that this is true. Not, let me give you things that I think you'll find convincing to come around to my position, but no, let me listen to you. Let me repeat back what I'm hearing. I want you to hear what you're saying so you can consider it again, and maybe even reconsider. Yeah, consider it again, reconsider it, maybe even go out and find better reasons for justifying your views. Let's see. Oh, another big thing about the basics of SE, I want to just touch on this before I move to some common misunderstandings, is that we often are interested in the foundation of this belief. It's not so much about the claim itself, and we try to not spend too much time interrogating respectfully the claim, because the claims that we make are essentially the beliefs that we hold. And the beliefs that we hold can be very tied to who we are. We often affiliate with the beliefs that we hold. So if we're questioning or challenging the belief, that can result in a person thinking that we're challenging them, which could in turn raise a person's defenses, perhaps make them a little bit less honest with themselves or with you, a little bit more defensive, a little more guarded, definitely more not as open as you probably want your conversation partner to be. So we don't spend a lot of time on the claim or the what of the belief, but the reasons that they think that belief is true or that claim is true. And then the method that they're using. This is the whole epistemology part, by the way. Epistemology, just think of methodology. What method are you using to verify your reasons that you can say, I'm very, very confident that this is true? So we're really interested in the lower level, deeper stuff, which interestingly, when you focus on the foundation, people tend to really like looking at their foundations. They tend to enjoy the process, and they're a lot less threatened, which can result in a really productive conversation. All right, let me go over some common misunderstandings. It looks like I have about 12 minutes here for this one. And this time I'm going to set a timer. I have a little timer here because I really don't want to run long.
You're the first speaker ever to have a timer, and I absolutely love that because that means that I can just relax and let you do your thing.
Well, let's see if I follow it. Okay. And I wasn't using it for the first few minutes, but I think we're okay. I don't know. All right. So what are some common misunderstandings? this is a little frustrating as a practitioner and promoter of SE, but I understand it because sometimes you may have just overheard somebody talking about this method, or you've just watched one or two videos, but those were older examples or maybe suboptimal examples. And it runs the risk of leaving people with a poor impression, or maybe you didn't even look into street epistemology, but you've heard a couple critiques about it. And that was good enough for you to realize, I don't even need to give this any of my time. So it is a little bit frustrating because most of the other misunderstandings that I see today, they're just that. They're a misunderstanding or a misconception of what it is we're doing. Some of them I think are fair criticisms, or maybe were at some point. Myself as the executive director of Street Epistemology International, which, by the way, this is just me, Anthony, giving this talk. I learned that from you, Gayle, by the way. Yeah, we're trying to develop something that I think could benefit other people, but oftentimes you find people who just have a misunderstanding of it, and I'm trying to correct it as best I can. So what are some of these misunderstandings? A common misunderstanding that I often see is that street epistemologists, or people who are using this approach, I was never fond of this term epistemologist, but or street epistemologists, but practitioners of this method are often charged with refusing to answer questions in return. So you may see conversations where myself or other people, or maybe you've observed interactions where somebody's using street epistemology, and we might defer answering a question. Now, I'll admit that I did that, and I don't do that quite as much these days because it never dawned on me that the perception of people observing that could be, well, they're hiding something, or they don't want to reveal their position. And honestly, when I first went out and did this, I was intentionally holding back my view on the claim that they were making. Well, there's probably a lot of atheists here. How many times have you revealed that you're a non-believer, and then you notice the reaction on their face? They back off, they become more defensive. So I was trying to avoid that kind of knee-jerk reaction. However, I think it is important as a practitioner of this method to not be afraid of sharing your views. In fact, sometimes sharing your views can advance the conversation because you've disclosed where you're at. You're building trust, I think, when you do that. Yes, you might run the risk of closing a person down, but there's a good chance they know somebody who has those views that you have. So it's beneficial, I think, to just reveal your position. You may have to do a little bridge building at that point, especially if they think, well, how can you possibly be moral without a God or something like that, right? We've heard those before. But don't be afraid to answer questions in return. It can be a back and forth. Another thing that I often hear is that SEers are picking on unprepared people. And that always frustrates me too, because I don't know who I'm going to be running into if I'm initiating talks on the street, or somebody's driving me to the airport in a car, like an Uber or a Lyft or something. I don't really know their level of expertise on the claim that they're making. I can only go off of what they tell me. But a lot of people will watch these interactions and say, well, it's clearly this person was not prepared. They gave poor reasons for thinking that this is true. I could have easily answered that question, or if they had only read this book. So I think a lot of this feedback, the criticism, I suppose, which again, I welcome, I think are people who are observing the conversations and regretting what they're watching. I think probably naturally, they don't like seeing somebody from their own tribe struggle to answer basic questions. And I understand that. I'm certainly not targeting people or anything like that. I'm totally fine talking with anybody, regardless of your level of expertise on this claim. But the people themselves are the ones walking around with these views. They think, and we think, even myself, everyone watching, we think we have a pretty good handle on the beliefs that we hold. So there's value in discovering, maybe I don't. So I just wanted to touch on that. Another complaint, or something that I've heard, not as much anymore, a lot of people will say, and I didn't even know this was a thing, but apparently there's this whole field of study called, well, there's a field of study called epistemology. I knew that, but there are academics who are into epistemology, and they study this inside and out. And sometimes they watch these novices like myself who I think I took a philosophy course here or there. I'm certainly not an expert in philosophy or even psychology or psychotherapy, to go back to some of the things Daryl was saying. But this technique was designed for everybody, regardless of your level of expertise. We're not experts. So when sometimes I think people who have expertise in certain disciplines watch these interactions, they may notice that we're being sloppy with some of the words that we use, or maybe not taking the same level of care that they would have. And I think, again, it goes back to, I'm observing this interaction. I don't really like how it's going, and therefore I'm going to just chuck the whole thing out the window. Please try not to do that. If you have expertise, come to our communities and help us make this better. If you are an academic epistemologist, if you think you can improve what we're doing, please do so, or show us some examples of your interactions, because I'd really like to see if you can do something better than what we're doing, because we're having such good talks. But I'm not closed off to the idea of some experts being able to help us out. Oh, here's another one that we get. You're constantly asking why, or how do you know? How do you know that? How do you know that? Why? So that's a constant thing. But I challenge anybody watching to pull up any video or SE conversation and either transcribe it, or you could look at some of the transcriptions that we've done that are on the Street Epistemology website, whatever. Look and see, like, write down the questions that we're asking. I suspect that you will notice that it's not at all like that. We tend to go where our conversation partner takes us. Yes, we are more interested in why questions, or the reasons why you think that that's true. And yes, we are interested in your methodology, or how, like, how do you know that that's the case? But I don't think I've ever seen an example of somebody doing SE. It's not to say that they're not out there. Actually, I did upload a video where all I kept asking was, well, why do you think that? Or how did you know that? Okay, I will admit to that one. It's on my channel. It's unlisted now. You have to dig around, but you can find it. Maybe I'll tweet it out later, just as a joke or something. Okay, but we try not to do that. We really don't want to overwhelm our conversation partners. We want to move at the speed that they're comfortable with, and not inundate anybody with questions. We certainly don't want to do that. Another thing I've heard is that street epistemologists often want to give the wrong, we will intentionally use the wrong definition of words, especially words like faith. This is always perplexing to me, because the definition that people are hoping that we use or insist that we use are often not the definitions that our conversation partners themselves are using. So there's a really important thing in street epistemology, that we try to pay attention to the words people are using. And then if we notice that it might be one of those baggage words that needs to be unpacked, that we take the time and ask our conversation partner to do so. And if you're an agent with RfR and you're chatting with somebody and they use a word like faith, or even God, or some other word where you think, boy, I wonder if we're on the same page with that word, please don't hesitate to ask them for some clarification on that. All right. Oh, here's another thing that we get, is that you're not fully disclosing what it is you're up to. You're holding something back. And I think that that's probably one of the fairest criticisms that I've heard. I look at some of my earlier videos, and I didn't even mention that I was doing street epistemology. I didn't reveal that I might ask some difficult questions to challenge your views. I was just basically saying, what's something that you think is true that I can ask you some questions about? I'm just asking questions. No, I'm not just asking questions. I'm asking very challenging questions that will hopefully result in you thinking about your views. And there are implications for your views if we do this exercise. So I think, like, just completely lay it out on the table. It might be a little off-putting to some people, and some people might be confused because you've over-explained. So pay attention to when you're revealing what you're up to, because you really want their consent. And if you're holding something back, then what are they really consenting to if you're not being completely upfront? So definitely explain what you're doing, but be careful about not over-explaining, because you can chase people away. The other complaint or concern that I've noticed is that and this might be a fair one too, is that people who are using SE are advancing an agenda. Because you may notice in my interactions, I get really excited when I run across somebody who has a God belief and I don't have a God belief. So if I differ in views with somebody, I get excited because I think this is a great opportunity to perhaps show this person that they don't have good reasons for thinking that this is true. However, I think there's a pretty noticeable line that I tend not to cross unless they're willing to go there. And that is, I resist giving them, and I might reveal my view. This goes back to why I don't like to reveal my view, because I don't really want to appear or even actually give ideas, I suppose, on how they can come over to my position. I really want to understand how they got to theirs. But when a person starts to realize that they can't explain to their own satisfaction how they concluded that this is true, or if this is really a good reason, it can be really tempting to then offer answers to them. But that's usually where I tend to end the conversation. So, and this is a gray area. I think that there are people who intentionally will use SE to advocate for certain positions. Don't eat meat, or you should eat meat, or you should wear a mask or you shouldn't wear a mask, those types of things, who you should vote for, whether God is real or not. So this really comes down to the actual user. There's a whole other part of this too, is a lot of people will say that street epistemology is a form of manipulation or persuasion. And I'm open to considering that. I think that there's certain stigmas with that word. I don't want it to be persuasion or manipulation, but maybe at some level it is. I'm not exactly sure. I try to explain it this way though, that I'm trying to be a mirror to the person that I'm speaking with so that they can see if they can justify to themselves that what they think is true to a high degree of confidence is true. And I usually end it at that point. Now that activity could result in them taking another look at their views, lowering their confidence, and maybe even coming over to my side. So I do understand that. But because most people who use this approach try to keep themselves and their views out of it, I'm leaning more towards that it's not a form of persuasion or manipulation. But then I think of the definition of the word, and probably every interaction we have with other people on nearly any topic probably is a mild form of manipulation or persuasion to some degree. What do you want for dinner? And you might start talking and revealing certain things that you're doing to convince. When in reality, in SE, we're asking, how did you become convinced? Not, how can I convince you? And that, I think, takes it out of the realm of persuasion. So the next item on my list is when you should probably not use this approach. I think I've covered some of the highlights of what this is, and I made a video on this. It was one of the first tutorial videos I made, because it became apparent to me early on that there are some people who are uniquely dependent on thinking that these beliefs are true. And I'm fairly certain that after asking a few questions or spending 20 minutes with a person, that they very well be less sure that something is true. So if you think that there might be a significant amount of harm to the interactions where you're using this questioning approach, then you may want to not use it or change the subject completely. Another thing is, if you get the sense that they may have some form of mental illness or like I said, an extreme dependency on it, then you probably want to back off. Realize though that we're not experts. I'm certainly not an expert in that area. And there may even be experts who struggle to discern the difference between these things. But probably a good gauge is if it crosses your mind that it might be one of these situations where you shouldn't engage, that's probably an indication where you shouldn't engage. And I'll also defer to some of the guidelines that RfR puts out to their agents. There's a certain threshold, isn't there? Like during the training, you're taught very early on to recognize your own limits and not offer resources or advice or services that RfR simply can't offer. And I would advise people who are interested in SE to also keep that into account. What about children? This is a topic that comes up all the time. What do you do when one of your young kids maybe has some friends over and the kid makes a claim because they think that it's true? Parents aren't around. What do you do? What if your child actually starts using Socratic questions or street epistemology? I've heard of situations where that happens. You may want to have a little bit of a discussion about what your threshold is. And for myself, I think my cutoff is probably the age of 15 years old. My son is 17. I think about 2 years ago, he had a friend who he stumbled across my videos and wanted me to SE him on his God claim. And I told my wife, I said, I'm just not going to do it. Not unless his parents are aware of it and maybe give some sort of written permission or something, or maybe they're even physically there. And then if they wanted to do that, I would probably ask them if I could record it, because I think that would have been an amazing conversation. We don't have a lot of examples where we're using SE with kids. So that's probably an area. If you're ever in doubt, ask yourself, well, how many people is this person going to impact? Does a person really take a 15-year-old seriously? So if it's a gray area, you might want to consider that. A lot of the conversations I have these days are with people who are content creators. They have YouTube channels, TikTok channels. They're reaching thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. And even though I might be wondering, are they mentally capable of handling this? I'll tread lightly and still proceed if it seems like they can influence a lot of people. So this is a gray area. This is something that you will kind of have to ask yourself. And this is an intermediate level question. It's not something that's often taught in SE videos. We may gloss over it here or there, but these are things that are coming up in the community that I think warrant talking about. Oh, another thing too is consider consider the power dynamics that might be at play. Is your boss making this claim, or a spouse, perhaps? What about an employee who reports to you? A person may be more deferential to you if you are in a supervisory role over them. They may be sharing things or deferring to your authority where they may not otherwise do. So if you have service people coming over, maybe some maids come over to clean the house or something, and they say something, you may want to consider that it's not a level playing field. This also happens too. Sometimes I go out, and I don't do this much anymore because of COVID, but I'll have conversations with people at the university. And being an older guy, I'm 50 now. I'll be 51 this year. And I've noticed that a lot of the students, they're in their 20s, sometimes even younger, and they'll just defer to me naturally because I'm an older person. And there may even be some diversity considerations there too. So they will often defer to me and say, yes, sir, no, sir. When I try to dissuade them from that. I might even call it out and say, unless you really feel comfortable doing so, there's no need to elevate me to any special level. And this is particularly common in the South. You'll notice there are lots of families that they take pride on their kids saying, yes, sir, no, sir. And I just think that skews the conversation towards my advantage in a weird way. So try to keep that in mind. And if you're ever in doubt whether you should proceed or not, ask them if they think you should proceed. You can literally say, I had enough of these conversations to realize that these questions could result in you starting to wonder, question, and doubt your belief. And I'm starting to wonder if this is an outcome that would be harmful to you. What do you think about that? And you can give them plenty of time to think about it. And I've done this before, and people would immediately say, I'm ready, let's go. What are you talking about? My belief is unshakable. So sometimes people don't believe you when you warn them in advance. But I would ask that you persist gently and say, well, hold on a second. Would you mind if we just took 24 or 48 hours before we revisited this? Because it's still a concern of mine. Or here's the link to one of my videos where somebody did start to question. You can basically give them more insight as to what you're doing so that they can proceed. But if they say, listen, I've watched these things, I've considered it, I'm still skeptical that you're going to be able to shake my view at all. However, I'm willing to participate in it. And then you can proceed. I didn't have this written down, but I think it's worth mentioning. You can also ask them if they want to believe true things or not. Is it important for them to believe true things, even though there may be a cost? You can just lay it out that way. A lot of people don't even consider questions like that. but it's really important that you mention that. So the next stage I want to move on is to barriers to effective engagements. So what what are some of the things that can get in the way of a productive conversation where you're using street epistemology? And these are also intermediate level concepts, I think, because many people who practice this don't even consider it, but I think it's really important that you do. And that is, have a dialogue with yourself before you even initiate talks or be prepared to engage with people where you're using this approach, and examine your own motivations. So ask yourself, what am I hoping to get out of this? What are my goals? What is a result that would make me think that this was a good talk? Have a really honest conversation with yourself, because if you're being deceptive in what you're doing, it will probably come out in the conversation, and that's not a good place to be. So once you've identified what your goals are, and then you communicate that to your conversation partner, you've knocked down a potential barrier that you probably didn't even know existed. So definitely do that. Another thing too is review the weight of your own personality and your ego on the claim being discussed. So if you plan on going to a specific rally where people are gathering and you're pretty sure that certain topics will come up, you may want to ask yourself, how upset do I get when this topic comes up? If I find that I really struggle on this claim in particular, and I'm just new to this method, I'm still kind of getting my bearings on how to do this approach, you may want to practice on safer topics and claims before you get into some of the things that you realize that it's a weakness of your own. So have a real honest dialogue with yourself where you identify your own strengths and weaknesses. Today, I don't think that there's many claims that could come up where I would say I would struggle to engage with them, where I wouldn't become my own obstacle in the conversation. But maybe there are. I may not discover it until I'm right in the middle of the conversation. So pay attention to what's going on during your conversations and say, you know what, I didn't realize that this at the moment, but I'm having a hard time not getting emotionally upset at what we're discussing. And I think it's probably best if we just ended it. And as an RfR agent, more than likely, you may have observed conversations of your colleagues where it seemed like maybe they were becoming a little terse, or things seem to be getting ramped up, and you might be wondering why. Well, that's probably what's going on. So try to pay attention to that. And there's no harm in saying, this conversation is going in an area where it's upsetting me and I don't want it to bleed through in my interaction. Is there somebody here that wants to step in? That's the advantage of the RfR agents, is that when you have these engagements, unless they're phone things, I don't know if there's anyone else listening on the phone, but when you're having these text engagements with people who are reaching out to you, unless it's changed, other people are watching your interaction. So keep that in mind. Here's another huge barrier to effective conversations that I hadn't considered. And that is when somebody equates truth with opinion. They think that they're on the same footing, that because I think it's the case is the same thing as saying that it actually is the case. So a lot of people will think, if I really, really think that it's true, I can make it true. And you can listen to the words that people are using. A lot of people will say things like, it's true for me, or it's my truth. These are key words to be watching out for that will give you an indication that people are conflating truth with opinion, or facts with opinion. Some practitioners of SE, this is one of the first things they talk about. Do you think that there's a difference between fact and opinion? How do you define the word truth or the word true? If I have this box of candies and we counted them up and we counted an odd number of pieces, if somebody walked by and insisted that there was an even one, would you agree that they were incorrect? Sometimes people will say, well, no, they're just as correct as us, even though we can demonstrate it to be even. I think that was my example. always mix those up. That could be a red flag that they are viewing truth in subjective terms, which has profound implications for later on in the conversation when you start exploring their reasons and their methods. Reasons and methods mean nothing if the person thinks truth is subjective, because any old reason will do to make me think that this is true. So spend a lot of time. You'll notice in the SE community, we do tend to spend a lot of time on this concept, and in a lot of the videos you may notice, sometimes even if we're struggling for a topic, I'll say, well, since we really can't pick a claim, how about if we do a fun little thought experiment with this box of candies, and I'll roll that out. And you'd be amazed at the conversations that can elicit and how useful it is later on in the conversation when you finally have them reveal a claim that they really think is true. And if you're on the same page with truth being objective, then that's a huge barrier that's knocked out of the way. At any point in the conversation, if you get the sense that they may be thinking that truth is the same as an opinion, then I would ask them if they would be willing to explore the idea of truth with them. It's a very big one. And I don't think that dawned on me until about 3 years into my forays into the public. I was like wondering, well, how come the outsider test for faith it didn't seem to faze them when I asked that question about, well, this person says that this is true, and this person says that this is true, and it doesn't land with them. Well, if a person thinks that they're both factually correct on a claim, and these are competing claims that can't both be simultaneously true, but they think that it is, then of course that's the big issue that you really have to get through. All right. Another barrier is conversation partners who have this high level of certainty, and they're intensely content in that. I know that it's true, and I know it's true just because I know that it's true, and there's no way I'm going to change my mind. That type of arrogant certainty can be frustrating when you encounter it. Be prepared for people who do have that. If you encounter that, my advice is not to just keep proceeding and asking them questions, but ask them if they recognize that there might be, ask them if they think that there's advantages or disadvantages to having an outset like that, a mindset like that. Maybe you can even list, what are some of the advantages of being so sure that you're right and not willing to change your mind, and write down a little bit of a list of things. What are some of the disadvantages? The disadvantages might be a little bit less in their mind. Sometimes though, just asking them, let's say that we encountered somebody who was just as sure that they were correct, and yet it's a competing view to yours, and they don't want to reconsider it. They say they know it's true, and there's no way that they're going to change their mind. What advice would you have for us, because we're working together to figure this out? What advice would you have for us to help that person take another look at their views? And when you frame it that way, because they think that they're right and that person's wrong because it's a competing view, they may start giving things that they themselves might consider to reflect on their own view. Okay, so try that. Another thing I've noticed is that oftentimes people, when you have them reveal their claim, they immediately become in the mindset, and I don't blame them, because I think we often tend to do this, is they adopt the mindset of, I don't want to reveal how I concluded that this is true. I want to convince this person asking me these questions that this is true. They go into this sort of preach mode, like a preach and teach mode. Let me give you the book that I think you're going to find convincing. And if you notice them doing that, you can acknowledge that they're offering you something that they think will help you. It's likely coming from a good place. So don't forget that. Give them the benefit of the doubt. They're trying to educate you on something that they think that I'm wrong on, that I'm mistaken on. But what I try to do is say, I'm not so much interested in what you think I'm going to find convincing to bring me to your side. We can get there, but at the moment, I'm more interested in how you became convinced. What book was the book that you were willing to offer me just now the thing that convinced you? More often than not, they're going to say no. No. I just thought that that would really resonate with you because I did read it a year ago, and there were some good things in there, but I was just as sure that this thing was true before I read that book. So don't be afraid to reframe things, and people start to understand that, like, oh, wow, they are really interested in how I came to this position. And that changes the whole dynamic of the conversation in a more positive direction. I'm trying to think now as an RfR agent, that probably doesn't really happen. The people who are reaching out to RfR are looking for advice. They are probably approaching you of the mindset of, I'm kind of at my wit's end. I don't know where to go. They're in receive mode. When you're doing SE with strangers or family members, they're probably more in a I'm convinced that I'm certain mode. So there's a little bit of a difference there. If you ever, we have about 2 minutes left on this section as far as I can tell, and feel free to jump in here, Amaya, if that's not the case. But sometimes you have conversation partners who are antagonistic, aggressive. They ramp up very, very fast. I have a video on my channel with a fellow. I don't think he liked me being out on this hiking trail interviewing people because he would give me dirty looks and stuff. And then one day he finally stopped, and he was just kind of a jerk. And he got very aggressive. And as he became more aggressive, I became more calm. And it wasn't easy to do, but because I wasn't matching him, he ended up coming down and becoming more calm, and we were actually able to have a fairly decent conversation. So if somebody is becoming more agitated, don't meet them. Recognize that they're getting agitated, and you may even want to acknowledge that they are, but don't match them in their level of antagonism. Let's see. Oh, do you ever encounter people who don't want to participate in some of the questions that you ask? They may say, well, I don't do hypotheticals. You get that a lot. If you get any resistance whatsoever on those types of things, you don't have to insist that they do consider your hypothetical, but you can say, well, that's interesting that you're not willing to consider this hypothetical because I found it really useful in getting to the root cause of what's propping up this belief. Do you mind if we have a conversation about what it is about hypotheticals that you don't like? So you can shift gears and turn your direction on the resistance that you're getting in a really, you're basically using the same approach of SE. You're going where they take you. So if you encounter a barrier, you can just start examining the barrier. And then, do you ever get this? You get a lot of people who just give you claim after claim after claim, almost like a fire hose blast. And as RfR agents, you probably get this. I know I certainly get this when I'm initiating talks or they're just organically happening, which is my preference. Sometimes they go really scattershot and they're just hitting thing after thing after thing. And by the end of it, you don't even know what claim they've made or what reason you're focusing on. It's just a muddled mess. Sometimes it could be helpful to just take a step back and say, and again, be honest. You can be, don't ever hold back with what you're thinking, because I think in the end, it'll make progress in the conversation. Just say, we've talked about so many different claims here and reasons. I'm honestly not sure where to go with this conversation. Where do you think we should go? You can also go really broad and say, it seems like there's a lot of claims that you think are true for a variety of different reasons. Can we have a broader discussion about how you decide what you accept and what you reject to be true? Generally speaking, I don't care what the claim is. When you're encountering a claim, how do you evaluate it and say, yeah, I'm going to accept that to be true, or no, I'm going to reject that and say that it's false. And now you're having this broader meta discussion about how they form beliefs, and you're not even getting roped into all these different claims. I can't wait to get to your questions. I love questions here. So I'm going to set my timer again for another 12 minutes, and I want to focus on this last section. And this is how to stay calm. This is one of the most common questions that I get, because I think a lot of people look at any SE video, mine or anyone else's, and no doubt you're going to see feedback like, I don't know how you stayed so calm during that conversation. How did you do that? Because I would have just lost my mind if that was me standing in front of that person. And I'd like to say that I've never lost my cool. I have, There are video examples on my channel where I have done that. So if you dig deep enough, you'll find those. But once you begin to realize that losing your calm only has problematic implications for your conversation, you start noticing when you're losing your cool, and this is my advice to you, pay attention to how you're responding to what you're hearing and how you're reacting. And if you feel that your heartbeat is racing, or your face is becoming flushed, or you're starting to sweat, or any of those indicators, your mouth getting dry, any of those indicators that this is upsetting me, that's probably your indication to yourself that you need to take a break or change the subject. One way to solve this dilemma of staying calm is a big part of that, I think, is the venue that you're having the conversation in. If it's a face-to-face, or if you're doing it over video chat where you can see the person and they can see you, that is a huge advantage to staying calm. If it's a text-based conversation where you're not getting these verbal cues or nonverbal cues, verbal or nonverbal in that case, and they're just rapidly responding back, and you're rapidly responding back, that's probably an indication that the venue that you're in is adding to some problem. Of course, you can still be in front of the person having a conversation with them, and you can feel yourself getting ramped up. So always try to keep in the back of your mind, what is the behavior that I would really prefer that I observe in them when I'm having this conversation? So from the very start, I'm trying to hold myself to a high standard so that they will acknowledge it to some level, maybe respect it, and maybe match it. But it's hard. It's difficult because a lot of people say things that are upsetting to us, they're insulting to us. We can become offended really easily on some things. And it's tough to set those things aside for the purpose of advancing the conversation. But if you can manage it, then you're going to probably avoid some of those things that will cause you to become upset. Try building some rapport, spend a little bit of time, figure out, assuming that these are strangers, you might want to figure out, well, where do they live? What's the weather like in their area? What brings them to the trail or to the school that they're at? And you might want to revisit that topic. So if it turns out that you both hike at this trail and you notice 10 minutes into the talk that you're getting a little bit of upset, you might want to ask them a little bit about the hiking trail again, revisit something that you have some common ground in. That might be a little bit difficult to do when you're chatting with somebody, I suppose, with RfR, because I know that there are some pretty good guidelines that are offered as far as not revealing too much about yourself. It really is, the focus really is on them. So that might be a little bit harder to do, but at the very least, pay attention to how you're feeling. Revisit your goals, revisit your limitations. And here's another tip that I think could be useful. And this was the case for me. I'm recording my talks, and it's pretend that you're being watched or listened to. And in the case of an RfR helpline agent, you likely are being observed, or maybe, I don't know if you guys record the calls and listen to them later. Maybe someone can talk to that. Not exactly sure if there's some observation, but pretend, even if you're not, you could pretend that you're on a stage and having this conversation where there's 100 people watching you. Or the thought goes through my mind, this talk is really interesting. I might eventually put this on my YouTube channel and several thousand people could watch it. And that is enough for me to remind myself of the importance of staying calm, because I don't want to look like a jerk. And that idea actually helps me stay calm. So I'm almost sort of deceiving myself or tricking myself, but it's a real factor. People could be watching my conversation and thinking, boy, he was really rude to her. Why did he do that? Why did he cut her off? Or, man, his hands were trembling in that conversation, or he seemed really perturbed. So thinking or reminding yourself that other people might be watching the conversation can really help. Another thing to kind of stay calm is avoid going down unrelated sidetracks. Many times in a talk, somebody will be raising things that are completely unrelated to the claim, They're interesting, but they're pulling you away from the actual trajectory of the conversation where you want to try to get to the foundation. And that could be a little bit frustrating. This is kind of an if or an or thing, but you can follow people down these little sidetracks. Sidetracks can be useful if you find yourself becoming a little agitated. Sometimes a little bit of a sidetrack onto an unrelated topic can be helpful because it diffuses things a little bit. You're talking about a topic that maybe isn't quite as upsetting. And then maybe you can reset the conversation and say, oh, I think we were talking about this claim. We got a little bit off track. It was a great talk, but do you mind if we get back to the claim that you talked about and exploring your reasons and methods? So you can definitely do that. If at any point you feel that you are getting upset, it doesn't hurt to verbalize it. You can reset the conversation. And then finally, there's nothing wrong with saying, I think we should just end it at this point. It might be best for both of us if we just ended it. And I've had some people say, oh no, we're not ending this talk. You stopped me. I'm giving you my time. And we're going on. We're going to keep talking. That's an awkward position to be in. Hopefully that doesn't happen to a lot of people, but if it does, you are well within your right of ending a talk. A talk really needs to be consent from both parties. I think I talked to that earlier. So don't be afraid to end a talk if you think that you won't be able to control yourself, or you're getting upset, or frankly, you just want to end it. There's nothing wrong with ending a talk if you want to. And my goodness, I think we're coming up on an hour, which is really good. I think we covered most of those. So I think this would probably be a good time to shift to some of the questions and answers that hopefully have been queuing up.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Anthony. That was really good. I really enjoyed especially the last part because I must confess I do have anger issues, and they do resurface when I'm having conversations about topics I care about. So that was definitely super helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we do have a list of questions. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask the first one, and then Madeline and myself will pick up a couple of more questions until we have time, really. So the first one I wanted to ask you is, someone says, how do you filter out claims that don't make sense?
Oh, how do I feel if I encounter a claim that doesn't make sense?
No, sorry. How do you filter out claims that don't make sense? Yeah.
If a claim doesn't make sense to you, then it's on you to ask questions to figure out what exactly is the claim that they're making. Mm-hmm. The claim makes sense to them, and it's their view that you're hoping to explore with them. So if they're using words that you don't understand, or a claim that you've never heard of before, sometimes people make claims about things. Like if you ever go to a different country or a different city, there's a big thing in San Antonio, Texas called ojo, this idea of the evil eye. I've lived here for the longest time, and I never realized that there were people walking around with these views. So the best way to filter out an unclear claim is to have them clarify it for you by you asking questions. And hopefully they can verbalize it in a way that you grasp it. They might have to use examples to illustrate it. But if you're ever in doubt about what it is you're being told, try to repeat it back to them so that they can hear what you're understanding it to be. And you can do this as an RfR helpline agent as well. You can say, if I understand correctly what you're typing here or saying over the phone, I think you're saying this. Do I have that right? You can check in with them along the way, and you can continuously do that. Don't overdo it, because sometimes people get annoyed because they think you're being condescending if you do it too much. So use some good judgment there, but that's how I would answer that question. Great question too, by the way.
Thanks for that. I'll take the next one, Amaya. There's a question about whether street epistemology or the Socratic method is it similar to a root cause analysis or the sidewine?
The sidewine? Oops.
Could you hear me? Either it says,
yes, I hear
street
you.
Epistemology or the Socratic method, is it similar to a root cause analysis or the 5 whys?
It's been a long time since I've done anything along those lines. It's interesting. A lot of people will watch what we're doing or talking about with street epistemology, and they notice similarities to business tools that they were given to solve problems, or sales techniques even. And folks who are into psychotherapy, such as Dr. Daryl Ray, notice things that they were trained to do. So a lot of the ideas that we're implementing seem to be tried and true techniques for bringing clarity to views and helping people reflect on things and getting to what's really propping up a person's view, or might actually be an issue that needs to be solved. So while I'm not familiar with those, it's possible. There very well might be some overlap there. I wouldn't be surprised if there was.
Thank you.
Someone else asks, what is the difference between a good street epistemology question and a bad gotcha question?
A bad what question?
A bad got you question. Sorry,
Got you.
from Spain. Clearly, my accent doesn't help here, but yeah. Hopefully that makes sense.
There's a really fine line between gotcha questions and good street epistemology questions. If the question, I have this tendency, sometimes I have the question that I want to ask, but then I spend a minute and a half wording it, so it's just way too long. So if you can't concisely phrase the question, it's probably an indication that it's a poorly formed question. What makes something a gotcha question? This is an interesting question, because sometimes people will look at the questions that we're asking. I've even seen some critics of SE say, they literally said, your questions, I feel like your questions are boxing me in, which almost might be the definition of a gotcha question. But when we're doing SE, we're trying to focus. And I think the focusing aspect of the questions that we optimally try to ask are to get to the clarity and to the real things that influence your confidence that the belief is factually true. So a lot of people will notice that, well, why isn't he or she asking me or pursuing this other line of inquiry, or this other topic that I've raised? Why are they going here and not there? I think that might concern some people, but if you ever get the sense that a person feels like you're asking gotcha questions, or you're not being as sincere or as inquisitive as you are attempting to be, encourage them to bring that to your attention as early as possible. Because you don't want that just sitting out there and them wondering about it the whole time. And now they're evaluating the quality of your questions and not the question that you just asked. And that can get in the way of the exploration of the belief. So encourage them to raise concerns that they may have about the questions that you're asking. And you may even assure them and say, the last thing that I want to do is ask you a gotcha question or a leading question. I want to ask you a question that will result in you thinking about your views and driving to the real reasons that's propping up this belief. And if at any point you feel that that's not what's happening, let me know. I've even had some people complain, basically any question that I asked wasn't sufficient enough to their satisfaction. They just pushed back. I don't know why they did. And I've also heard of people say this stuff. And sometimes I say, well, what question do you think that I should ask you next? What is the optimal way to ask the next question that you think that I should ask you? And if you can do that without upsetting them, hopefully they'll be giving you the parameters of what they expect to see in a question, and you can try to accommodate them as much as possible. But usually when somebody's pushing back that much, they're worried about the questions that you're asking and the implications that it has for the belief. Okay. Next question.
That was a great one. Thanks for that. There's a question about whether there's a course that one can take to learn street epistemology.
Well, there will be one. We're in the process. I would imagine we probably won't have something for people to look at until maybe mid-year, if I'm being really optimistic. We identified 22 modules of of major categories that will make up a course on street epistemology. We polled the SE community. We have experts who have been doing SE for a long time, and we're developing the course as we speak. We've been spending hours and hours on it, but eventually there will be a self-directed course that you can take to teach yourself this. There will be a help desk component where you can go to a community if you got stuck on a question. And then we're also looking for volunteers to help us write these modules out too. So this is a community effort, but ultimately, I honestly think that the course that we're developing, it has the potential to be the best resource available today for SE. I'm setting a very high bar in my own mind on this course, and I hope we match it, but it might be better than the videos. It might be better than books that have talked about this. It might be better than the app that was out there or other resources that are out there today. So I'm very optimistic about that, but I don't have anything for you yet, but we're working on it as hard as we can.
That's great.
That's great.
Let us know when you do publicize it. And
Okay.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we'll probably be looking for people to not only help us write those modules, they'll be working in coordination with subject matter experts and project leads, but we also will probably be needing people to test it for us, help us go through the materials, give us some feedback. Was this confusing? Could it be better?
Sounds great, thank you. So another question is, and I'm not sure if you listen to Talk Hidden, but someone asked, on Talk Hidden yesterday, Villa Bianca said that they did some research into the backfire effect. And there is a study to show that it's not as prevalent as it has shown to be. Have you heard anything about that recently?
Yes, in fact, I saw V's video. I saw that it was going to be premiering, and I messaged them to introduce them to a neuroscientist who studies this. And then I noticed an hour later that their video was actually running. So I watched it, and it was great. Yeah, there's a big motivation behind street epistemology. I didn't touch on it, but there's this idea that is somewhat common. It's called the backfire effect. For people who don't know, it's this idea that if I were to give somebody facts to show that you're mistaken, it could result in a person doubling down, being more sure in their position, which seems to be a real thing, because I would venture to say most people have engaged with people where they've done that approach and they've noticed that happen, or they've noticed it in themselves. We don't watch the video that we were sent by somebody that we disagree with. We might diminish or blow off that research that they're giving us because we just don't think that it's good. As far as I understand, the latest research seems to indicate that you can give a person information that shows that they're mistaken, and they may, especially information that contradicts a belief that is core to who they are, and they may actually they may actually accept the information as fact, even though it shows that they're wrong. However, the latest research, as far as I'm aware, is that recognition doesn't then result in an impact in their attitude towards their view. So they're just as sure, even though they've accepted this information that shows that they're mistaken to some degree, it doesn't tend to have a corresponding impact, and this is an SE kind of thing, it probably doesn't impact their level of confidence on that scale from 0 to 100. There might be a little bit of a dent, but they probably it doesn't really land with them. That's what seems to be the latest research. All I can say is that, well, I think that was a big motivation behind SE, is the recognition of the backfire effect. There's something more going on in these conversations beyond just attempting to avoid people becoming trenched in views and doubling down on things, where even if that could be shown that that's not even a factor, something is happening in these talks. People do tend to enjoy them. They tend to be reflecting on their views. They tend to be reconsidering their positions, changing their mind completely. But ultimately we have to go where the science takes us. And one of the goals for myself as the executive director, I'll put that hat back on briefly, of the nonprofit, is to encourage people who are in fields of study like neuroscience to help us study what is going on in street epistemology. And we've had, at least one neuroscientist reach out to us now who says that they're interested in studying what we're doing to see if what we're doing is effective. And that's exactly where we need to go. So I'm glad that people are looking into it. It's great to see skeptics be skeptical of the things that we ourselves were so sure was a thing. And that's a testament to what skepticism is. So while it's tempting to become defensive and say, well, don't watch their video, they don't know what they're talking about, or something like that, trying to diminish that, I think we need to accept that, pursue it, and figure out what the truth of the matter is. Because if we can find out what's really happening, it's going to move this forward in a positive direction, even though it might cause us to revise what it is we're teaching or what it is we think is happening. Ultimately, if we follow the science, it's going to probably get us closer to the truth. And that's all I have to say about the backfire effect at this point.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have
questions.
another question here. Yeah, these are really great. And your answers are to the point. So thank you for that. So the next one is, how might you suggest approaching conversations where a partner knows your position, with atheism being an obvious example here? So if your partner is now your conversation partner, they know that you're an atheist, how might be a good way to get around that to be able to still have a fruitful engagement that's, street epistemology?
Well, hopefully they're not becoming too defensive or closed off by you revealing your position. Hopefully they're being a charitable conversation partner by you revealing your view and say, well, I don't think that that's the case. However, I'd like to explore the claim that you're making. Probably the best thing that you can do is tell them that you're interested in having them ask you similar questions back, that this can be a back and forth. I think I'm justified in my position. You tend to, it seems like you think that you're justified in yours. Let's make this a back and forth. You can ask me questions in return. In fact, I'd love it if you use street epistemology, this approach of SE, and ask me similar questions to get to what is my claim that I'm making? What are my reasons? Can I back them up? Have I used a reliable method? But sometimes there are people who just, for one reason or the other, they don't want to talk to somebody who doesn't think that there's a God, or they think that it wouldn't, their deity wouldn't look favorably on it if they seriously contemplated questions from somebody who didn't think that a God was real. That you're asking questions to make me doubt, and doubt is of the devil. There's a video on my channel with that very title. If you notice anything at all like that, it's a good idea to ask yourself if maybe I need to go broad here again. Maybe I need to broaden the discussion and just have a talk about, well, what is doubt exactly? What do you think doubt is? Are there pros and cons to doubting? Can you think of a time where doubt was beneficial? What would be the worst thing that could happen if you began to question or wonder or doubt about this view? So I don't know if I have a really good answer for you about that, but other than maybe setting that topic on the back burner or inviting them to question you about your view or just broadening it out, you could just talk about a completely different topic where you can say, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm an atheist, you're a theist, you don't feel comfortable with me questioning you about God. Is there a completely different topic that you would be interested in talking about? So be willing to back off on it a little bit. And you might be amazed at, they may say, well, yeah, let's talk about karma instead, or the election, or mask usage. You can talk about a completely different topic, model to them that you're being respectful and trustworthy, and you may just end up causing them to be willing to talk with you, even though you disagree on those other things.
That's great. I wanted to say, I love how meta the whole process is, how fluid. So you go from, can we talk about X, Y, Z, to I'm not quite comfortable. Well, what's comfortable, And so no matter what pops up, there's just so many other avenues you can go down.
Right.
It's wonderful stuff.
If I could just add to that, I'm glad you noticed that, because SE, or even engaging with people who reach out to RfR, it's not about tricking or trapping people. It's about totally understanding their reasoning and what's troubling them and what they think will be the solution, or what they think is the best reason for propping up their belief. So being deceptive or any form of trickery doesn't advance your conversation. It sets it back. So be as clear with them as possible and honest with them as possible. And if you find yourself struggling to be honest with them, then you may not be a good candidate for being a practitioner of this method. You might want to promote it for people who can do that. But ultimately, this is to try to get to the truth of the matter. What's really troubling this person who's reaching out to recovering from religion? What's really propping up this view? And when you can start setting aside poor reasons and unreliable methodologies, you can start narrowing down the list and seeing what's left. And ultimately, I think that's how we get as close to the truth as possible. So it's ultimately, I think, in your best interest to be as forthcoming and direct without being insulting as you possibly can.
Cool. Thank you
Awesome.
so
Thank
much,
you.
Anthony. We only have time for one more question.
Okay.
I know there's a few questions that we haven't had time to ask, but I think you will stay a bit for the hangout session, so hopefully you can answer a few more questions there. But our final question of the Q&A is, how long after you began did you start to feel like you had a good handle on street epistemology? And they also asked, like, approximately how many conversations?
That's a good question. I'm tempted to say I'm still not there, but that would be kind of disingenuous. Like, I think I have a really good handle on it today. Like I mentioned before, I don't think that there's a claim that I couldn't explore using the method, or a claim that would get me upset. How long did it take me to get there? How many conversations? I don't know. And I'm going to be really honest with you, as I try to be. I'm worried that my giving an answer might give people the impression that it's going to be the same for them. I think it probably took me a good year or two, and probably 150 or 200 conversations, to the point where I would say, okay, I really think I grasp what's happening here. Now, you have to keep in mind that I read one book and started going out and having talks. There are people now who tell me, I've watched 5 videos. I've seen people who maybe they've read a book, watched a couple of videos, practice. There's practice sessions in the Street Epistemology Discord. We're developing this course. There are far more resources out there today that have probably shortened that time for people, which is, again, probably a good reason for you not to put too much weight in the amount of conversations I needed, or the amount of time that I took. But I guess I'm optimistic that it's the entry ramp to becoming comfortable doing this and becoming proficient at it is probably a lot shorter for people these days than before. But you have to put yourself into it. Let's see. You have to take yourself out of it, but you do have to apply yourself. You do have to put yourself into it, but don't bring yourself into it. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
Does it make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
I hope so.
It does.
Great, fantastic questions. I can't wait to answer more in the after party hangout. Is that what we're calling it?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anthony. That was great. It was really a great presentation, great questions, and you answered them amazingly. So thank you so much for taking the time to have a session with us today. I know it takes a lot of behind the scenes work too, so thank you so much for that also. And thank you, Madeline, of course, for co-hosting with me as usual. And obviously next week we are also going to have another RfRx session. And next week's session is going to be about being trans and non-religious. And we're going to have Sarah and Becca Ray explaining us their experiences on it, and just a bit of their thoughts on it. So before we jump to the hangout session, I'm going to let our amazing, fantastic, wonderful, lovely Gayle do like a bit of a RfR, how do you say it? Like an advert kind of thing. So I'm just gonna let her do her thing because she's amazing at it.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Anthony, what an informative session. That's wonderful. I've been familiar with SE for years, but I still am fascinated by the whole process. I I take hope from it, because I think you have done more to change minds than all the debating and all of the screaming and all of the fussing up to this point. I think it's such a valuable thing. I'm so grateful for the session, and what wonderful questions from the group of attendees. I read with interest as we kind of pulled apart this, not just the basics of Socratic methods, but those things that are maybe are a hindrance to our street epistemology. I encourage everyone to visit Anthony's YouTube channel and to watch some of those videos. It's one thing to talk about it, it's quite another to see it in practice. So thank you for coming to the RfRx for the evening, Recovering from Religion. We have a very simple mission statement. We seek to provide hope, healing, and resources to folks who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. If that's you, we welcome you. We welcome you. You're welcome to have a chat with one of our trained agents. You're welcome to have a phone call. Pursuant to that, you might be invited to come into our online community, where you can have conversations to other folks who are somewhere on the spectrum of questioning what maybe they've never questioned before. We have local support groups, which in different times than now, we're able to meet together. Right now, we're having all of those support groups are meeting online, but in the future, we'll come back together again and meet. We've got a lot of other programs going on. We have a blog. We often have a podcast. We have these RfRx meetings. We have a number of places. And if you're further along on the spectrum, and you're ready to volunteer, we'd love to have you. We have a training process. We welcome volunteers with open arms. We run the organization of RfR with volunteers, and we'd love to have you part of the family. If that's not where you are right now, if you'd rather be a donor, I get that. I understand that. Sometimes we have money to give instead of our time and our talent, and I understand that, and we'd love to have that too. That supports all of our programs. Thank you for coming. This is my favorite part of the RfRx is when we go into this social hour where we can chat and talk to one another. Anthony's agreed to stay for a little bit, I think. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe he'll stay for a little bit. Dr. Daryl Ray's in the room with us. If you have other questions that haven't been answered, I see some familiar faces on the screen. I've tried to mention in the chat that I see you, and I'm glad that you're here. Enjoy this evening. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you back next week.
Yay!